Now I'd like to call to order King County Finance and Budget Committee for Wednesday, March 27th at 9:01. Roll call, please.
Juby,
here.
Lewis, Sanchez,
present.
Surges,
Present.
Tepe,
Deputy here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Berman.
Berman's here.
We have an in-person quorum.
Do we have remote attendance requests? I don't. We do not.
Everybody's here.
Well, Lewis. Approval of minutes.
Moves for unanimous consent for the approval of the minutes from the February 28th, 2024 meeting.
And they will go on as approved. Public comments? To the best of my knowledge, we do not have any. Treasury report, Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've introduced a new feature to my presentations, both here and over in public service. I call it People Who Serve and Help Us. And this month in finance, I'd like to introduce to you Richard Arts. So Richard, would you stand up, please? What Richard does is he maintains our vendor files. He has the responsibilities basically include making sure that scammers don't steal from us, as taxpayers. So in short, and in the vernacular, he makes sure that the taxpayers don't get screwed. So not such an easy job, by the way. There are lots of attempts. I think that Roger Fonstock does a nearly miraculous job of keeping the moat built so that they can't get through. He has responsibilities for both current, uploading current people, vendors, and also doing annual updates. He plays basically a 3,500 vendors to one. We used to have in the treasurer's office 2 people taking care of those, but what Richard does, he takes care of all the nuts and bolts, and then I've taken the responsibility to do the final check on those. So as many of you recall, maybe 3-4 years ago, there was a $3.2 million check that went out to a road construction company, and it was a miracle that we got it back. So Richard comes to us with 8 years of experience in the circuit clerk's office during Tom Hartwell's time before he died. May he rest in peace. He has a master's in criminal justice from Aurora University, so Kane County College University. So Richard, would you stand up and could we recognize his dedication? Okay, and I was supposed to ask you to put up page 20. Blair, page 20 is basically the control document that Richard gives me during his work. So could you put up page 21 and 22? The same theme generally, bank safety and security assessment. We pay $350 a year for a quarterly assessment of bank safety from an outside national source. The real protection is the collateralized deposits that we have in those banks. But we go over this, I go over this every quarter, and we did have one of our banks that appeared on it, and I called and got a written explanation of where that stands. So that's basically in a yellow category, just cautious, we're keeping an eye on it. So thank you, Blair. Could you put up page 9, please? So the interest income, it continues strong. We've projected for this year 12 million. We're at a pace of approximately 16 to 18 million. The change between the February 24th bar on page 9, that's the 1.488 million, and then the total interest amount on page 6. So let's see. If you'll go to page 8. Okay, that is, and I'm sorry that it's in your package, it's legible and readable, but basically we've improved how we're tracking earned income. We want to make sure that the managers get credit for every penny that's earned, and that cannot be withdrawn or refunded. And so we've included accretion on zero-based bonds. Kane County was a constructive part of sponsoring legislation that allowed county treasurers to use the highest quality short-term corporate bonds. And we hadn't used that up until about maybe 10 months ago. We have a ladder of those. They're about 9 months, 6 to 9 months maturity. And again, the highest quality grade. So some of what the catch up is in this year, some will be an adjustment in the audit to last year's interest income. The good news is that that's an additional $1.2 million. So, okay. Next item is we're wrapping up on the operating bank transition. 11 out of 18 of our accounts have zero balances. The rest are being paid down by the outstanding checks. Again, the selection of Chase, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairman, and the team that put together the selection. Chase has more than 1,900 local government clients, 650 counties, and 7 of the 10 largest counties in the United States. The benefits that they bring are professional bench strength in support, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in technology upgrades, have the best systems in the country for us to adopt, and they bring to us $650,000 in less fees, more earnings. It's over 2 times what our predecessor bank delivered. They also provide a national county roundtable webinar. The first one I'll attend by Zoom is on April 17th. And again, it focuses on best practices. So I think I'll leave off at that.
Very good. Any questions of Mr. Lawson? Moving on then, the auditor's report, Ms. Wegman.
Hello, good morning. My report is on file. Do want to point out that we have distributed the fourth quarter report for 2023, so everybody should have received a copy of that. Also wanted to provide a procurement card vendor update. We have distributed all of the P cards. We're missing 5, but we're in the process of doing that for our new vendor, Chase. And we are slowly converting away from Fifth Third. We should be doing that successfully here in the next couple months. So that's my report.
Any questions of our auditor? Thank you very much. Our next item is the resolution approving February 2024 claims paid of $9,311,139.80. Do we have a motion to?
Sanchez moves.
Sanchez moves. Lewis seconds. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, aye.
Lewis. Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Tepe,
Tepe, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes. Thank you. Moving on. Item 9, Finance Director's Report. Ms. Hopkinson.
Hello. So my presentation today is going to be divided into 2 sections. One is going to be the monthly report. And then the second part, we're going to talk about the 2025 budget and various revenue options. So for the monthly report, we're still closing out fiscal 23. We're almost there. There's a few more accruals that we have to book. But for the general fund, which is our largest fund, which historically has budget issues, a budget shortfall, we're currently at $114.4 million in expenses for fiscal 23, but only $107.7 million in revenues, which means the difference was made up by our use of our fund balance. So the county had budgeted to use about 16 million in fund balance for fiscal 23, and we're going to use more or less about 7 million. And as a reminder, the county has budgeted to use 9 million in fund balance for 2024. And it would appear that we will continue to use up our fund balance. The unearned revenue, as I mentioned last month, is going to be something that I'm going to start reporting on. It's still a work in progress. And unearned revenue is revenue where the county has received the cash, but we haven't yet identified how to apply that money. So in the general fund, we've got $2 million. The county clerk's office received a grant, but they have not yet identified what they're going to, which expenses they're going to apply to that grant. So it's sitting in essentially a liability account. Next page, please. Our select tax revenues, these are the other than property tax revenues for the entire county. I've got a chart up there for fiscal 2023 and 2024. Anything that is sort of out of or should be an area of concern is highlighted in red. Things that are performing better than we had expected are in green. Next page. This is just a chart depicting the same information, the top part. And I separated the motor fuel taxes from the rest of the taxes just because it was too much on one graph. The more interesting one to me is the lower one, the motor fuel taxes. The green line is the state motor fuel tax, and the blue line is our local county motor fuel tax. You can see back in 2019, when the state doubled the motor fuel tax, it jumped. This is the portion that we received. And then with COVID-19, it came crashing right back down. But the state motor fuel tax revenue is increasing at a faster pace than our local motor fuel tax revenue, although our local motor fuel tax revenue is starting to finally pick up. Next page. And the next page after that, just an update on our local government distributive fund revenue. This is revenue where our county, as all other local governments, receives a share of the state income tax, the state local use tax, and the state cannabis regulation tax. And you could see historically the trends. The cannabis regulation tax, as I mentioned before, we can now report on that. So you can see it's a very small portion of what we're getting from the state. And it's managed, all the cannabis, state cannabis regulation tax revenue that we get is managed by our sheriff's office. Next page, personal property replacement tax. As I've said before, the state indicated that in 2022, they perhaps their estimate for distributing personal property replacement tax wasn't based on good numbers. And so they're going to be correcting that in subsequent years. So that's why there's such a fluctuation in the personal property replacement tax revenue that we received. Next page. This is our state and local cannabis tax revenue. The small bar is the revenue that we get from the state. The blue bar is our local cannabis tax revenue, which is on organizations that are resident here in Kane County. So that's pretty steady revenue over time. Our collective bargaining agreements, next page. Another one was just settled last month or just approved by the board 2 weeks ago, yesterday, the sheriff's corrections. So there's just a handful of contracts that are overdue. Workforce development, sheriff court security, sheriff maintenance and janitor, and our coroner's office. But all the rest have been settled. Next page. I added a new column to this with a 2024 forecast for salaries. these are salaries across all funds, not just the general fund. So here's all of our elected offices and all of our departments. Here's the salaries over time. Through 2023, the sheriff's number will change once we book the accrual for their collective bargaining agreements, which is about $900,000 retro pay for 2023. And so our forecast for 2024, as you can see, year over year, the salaries increased by departments. Does anyone have any questions on these salaries by departments?
Mr. Leonard,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathy, I have one question for you with respect to the collective bargaining agreements.
Mhm.
Last month, I had asked you if you could give me a specific percentage increase for just the salaries and then add the benefits onto that, so we'd know for not only this year, but the years to come, what that actual percentage is.
For all of the collective
Yeah.
bargaining agreements, I will get that to you. My mistake, I didn't realize. Yeah, I do have a chart that has all the collective bargaining agreement percent increases year over year. One thing, and this question came up in our our 2025 budget kickoff meetings. And I'll throw this out there because our HR director and myself have talked about this because it is a question that comes up just generally. Everybody's like, what do they get? What do I get? The county, to my knowledge, we have never actually done a study to compare union increases to non-union increases. Both the collective bargaining agreements and the county have given equity adjustments in their contracts over the last couple of years, and the county went through the whole salary equity study last year. So there were equity increases in the salaries. So it could be an apples to oranges situation where without like a complete market study of, is this union salary up to market? Is this non-union salary up to market? If you're saying, well, the non-union gets 2% and union gets 3%, I actually don't know the answer. I mean, I don't know the answer if that is an equivalent increase. Somebody would have to do a whole big study on that, but I will get you that information.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we skip 2 pages ahead? Next page. And okay, that page. Just an update. The 2024 budget book, we should have it uploaded to our website by the end of the day today. And we will submit it to the GFOA. The 2023 audit, the auditors came here to do test work. We literally just got off the phone with them this morning. We still have some additional test work to do. But we're shooting to have our audit done by May 31st because our audit report is due within 6 months after the end of the. As a reminder, this is the 5th and final year of our audit contract with our audit firm. So we will need to be going out to bid, which we will be doing probably within a month. The 2025 budget process, we kicked off last week. We had 2 days. There was a few departments that weren't able to make it. We will reschedule for them. But we asked all the departments as part of the budget process to do their mission and goals. We're renaming it to mission and outcomes forms. They're all working on those first. And that is going to be very important for the 2025 budget process because this is where they're going to lay out what is their authorization, i.e. the statutory, county code, et cetera, other regulations requiring them to do what they do in their offices, and then also listing out outcomes. What do they need to achieve in their office, and then explaining how they're going to achieve what they need to achieve. So that should be very helpful to the board when reviewing everybody's budget. And it's a lot of information that people have asked to be included in the budget process. And I don't think we've ever done this before where that information is done first. So those meetings were held. And then once the departments provide that information, we will open up the budget module for them to enter their contractual services and their commodities and their capital. We explained to the departments per the guidance of this finance committee and the executive committee that we are trying very hard to hold everything to less than a 3% increase compared to the 2024 budget, which is going to be difficult because a lot of the contractual services that the county needs have increased greater than that. But that is the request that we provided. And then we also explained to the departments the finance committee's guidance that limits the number of vacant positions that can be added to the budget. If you recall, it was essentially 1 vacant position per 50 people in your department. So the max number of vacant positions is 4, and that is regardless of what fund your personnel is in. So even if you have all of your activities in a special revenue fund, we're all in this together, so to speak. Let's see. Next page. We have been working with the state's attorney's office, and thank you very much to Steve Ford and Caitlin Vargas in the state's attorney's office have been helping us develop resolution best practice templates, which we will be sharing with all of our county offices on our internal finance page. And that is just going to be extra guidance so that resolutions contain the best practice type of information that'll be helpful to the board and to others. And we are updating, the finance department and our purchasing department are updating our King County internal webpage with all sorts of, it's a work in progress with all sorts of helpful information. And our purchasing report is on the next page. And we're going to be taking some additional changes to our county financial policies, hopefully to the April Finance Committee meeting related to purchasing and some internal procedures that will be helpful in managing purchases across the county. So look for that for next month, along with some other, I know there's still a few little items in our financial policies that need to be fixed, some outdated language. We are aware of that and working on that. I also wanted to highlight, if you could go next couple of pages down. Okay, so these are reports that we just started adding. I think last month was the first time we added this report, or 2 months ago. These 2 reports are just to highlight which county funds went over budget on the expense side and on the revenue side. And one thing, and I wanted to make the finance committee aware, and I've talked this over with our audit firm since last fall and confirmed it with them last week. The county traditionally at the end of the year would take a gigantic budget adjustment journal entry through the county board to true up all of the funds where the funds went over budget so that nothing looked like it was over budget. We are actually not required to do that. The issue is we do have funds that went over budget, which is concerning. So a couple of them, you know, there's interesting reasons for, like the first one, the emergency reserve fund. It went over budget because we had to make a journal entry to consolidate it. But if you look at some of these other funds on this list, and I won't go through them one by one, but if you look at that far right column where it says year-to-date percentage actual over budget. So if it's over 100, it went over budget. So you have this report in your packet for both the expense side, the revenue side too. Revenue would be good news. But we do have at least probably 20 funds that went over budget. Okay. Keep going. I think we're going to then now go to, unless anyone has any other questions on the monthly report, we're going to start talking about the 2025 budget.
Any questions? Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick on the cannabis tax, I believe it showed that on the county's portion, we're getting about 100,000 a month. Is that money also beholden to just programs out of the sheriff's office? Okay, so it's just the state cannabis.
Just the state statute language for that cannabis tax. It has to be used in a law enforcement capacity. So that is actually going into a special revenue fund, but our local cannabis tax goes into the county's general fund.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because that's a lot of money to spend on programming for
Yeah.
cannabis. So, okay, thank you.
Any other questions of? All right.
Okay, 2025 budget, as I said, we had the budget kickoff meetings. We've asked all the departments to hold their spending, their 2025 budget to within 3% of the 2024 budget. And their vacant positions. But if you go to the next slide, and we went over this at the finance committee, last month. Even if we do that, we're still using fund balance, which this is not a sustainable thing to do. We're essentially digging into our fund balance to pay for current year expenses. And at some point, we will run out of money in our general fund, bar any new revenue source or cutting expenses. So look at 2023. I just went over that, 6.6. By the time we post everything, maybe $7 million in fund balance that we're using to balance the 2023 budget. We've budgeted to use up 9.6 of our fund balance to fund 2024. 2025, if we increase everything by 3%, we will use up 11 million of our fund balance. I even increased the revenues by 3%. So this is not sustainable. Next page. This is just a forecast. Again, this is just for the general fund, that if you continue down this path, and you don't change anything by 2027, we will be digging into our emergency reserves. And by 2028, we will essentially, yes, it won't be a pretty picture. And I don't think anybody wants to get to the point where there's massive layoffs in 4 years, which we could have done something about beforehand. And Blair, I sent you just 3 pie charts this morning. If you could pull those up real quick. So our general fund, general revenue, this is just a picture of what goes into our general fund. So about 41% are other taxes. This is for the 2024 budget. About 26% or so, 28% is property tax revenue. And then we have other sources of revenue, charges for services, reimbursements for salaries. And then you see fund balance utilization is 9%, which that's, I mean, essentially 10% of our 2024 budget is being funded by our reserves, which we are lucky enough right now to have some extra reserves, but we can't continue to do that. So next pie chart. This is an interesting chart. Sorry that one got covered up on the bottom there. So this is the required share of general fund, general revenue by elected office and department. So there are certain offices that generate their own fees that essentially are able to, and other reimbursements that cover their entire budget. Treasurer's office, development office, recorder's office are essentially the 3 departments that they have fee revenue, and or grants and or reimbursement revenue that essentially pay for all of their expenses. So what this chart shows is what by department, by elected office, how much of that office's expenses require general fund, general revenue. So I deducted out all their reimbursements, all their grants, all their fees, all their fines. So how much of each of these offices requires property taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, et cetera? So you can see the sheriff's office is the largest piece, state's attorney, court services, building management, public defender, et cetera. Next slide. And then just kind of a comparison, elected offices versus non-elected offices. And for elected offices, I also included judiciary, all the offices related to the judiciary. So 77% of our general fund budget, the tax revenue is used to fund elected offices, sheriff, state's attorney, et cetera. So, okay, we can go back to my regular presentation. So next slide. This is just a picture of what I've talked about, that if we continue as we keep going for our general fund and nothing changes and we increase wages every year, we will run out of money. It's kind of an easy, you keep increasing expenses and you don't increase revenue, you run out of money. So next page. Also wanted to bring to your attention, because it's the general fund, we think of it mostly for operations, but it is the pretty much the primary source of funding for all of our capital projects efforts across the county, all of our facility maintenance projects, the fix-it projects, the life safety projects. And we've been working internally to come up with a ranking system based on a framework that will be used to rank all of the projects, facility maintenance projects, whatever you want to call them, because historically the projects have just kind of come up and they're voted on, and we really need to rank them. So next page. And we will be, this is a work in process, but we will be ranking them based on life safety, preserves assets and property, maintains or improves security. It's a depreciation issue that just needs some general upkeep. And then lastly, new, additional, and desired capital. So this could be something that does not meet those other criteria. It could be something that somebody just wants a redesigned office, but it'll, in our ranking, it'll fall to the bottom of the list. Because we do need to keep that into consideration, because we have a $40–50 million 5-year capital improvement plan. And after this year, they will, if they complete all their projects, they will not have any money to do any of their projects in 2025. Because the money has to come from the general fund, and we would need probably an additional 10 million in general fund revenue to do these projects. So next page. So today what we wanted to talk about was our funding options. What are some of the options that the county has on the revenue side to close the gap? Property tax revenue increases is within control of this board to do that. Locally controlled tax revenues. All of these things have been talked about for probably 3 or 4 years by myself and the previous finance director. So this is nothing new. The local option motor fuel tax, we've talked about increasing that and then reallocating the RTA transportation sales tax revenue from KDOT to the general fund to close the gap. We've talked about the special county retailers occupation tax, and I'll be talking through each one of these separately in a second. And then looking for more grant revenue. You know, the only issue with grant revenue, of course, is it's perhaps not sustainable for the long term if you're not sure that you can get the grant year after year. And financing, although I would, you know, this is issuing debt. Right now, the county probably is not in a good position to issue debt for any capital projects. Next slide. I've shown this before, just pulled back an old slide, comparable major revenues and statistics. So this is Keene, DuPage, McHenry, and Lake counties. These are your top tax revenues: property tax, sales tax, RTA, sales tax, state motor fuel tax, local motor fuel tax, other taxes. Just a comparison on tax revenue that is easily compared county to county, and then just dividing it by the population. And Kane County has the lowest tax revenue per capita compared to our surrounding counties. I will point out a few things. McHenry County, as you know, last September voted to increase their local motor fuel tax from 4.5 to 8 cents. And just last week or 2 weeks ago, McHenry County voters, it would be last week, McHenry County voters voted in the special county retailers occupation tax for mental health purposes, which I haven't yet added to this. So next slide. This is just our property tax extension history over time. So the Illinois Department of Revenue every year issues what the CPI is. They issue this letter in January. So they issued it in January of 2024, and it's their consumer price index is 3.4% for this year. Next slide. This is just a history of our property tax levies that we've extended over years. We've had a couple of questions from time to time. So the county has one tax levy. The county can decide how to allocate it among funds. So that's why you'll see from year to year that sometimes the amount that has been allocated to insurance liability or FICA could be more or less. But the county makes that decision. The total levy is what's on your tax bill. We don't have separate, we do have separate levies for each one of these, but the county is in control of how that gets allocated to all the different funds. Next slide. Very important consideration when we're talking about budget deficits, potential budget deficits. Our RTA transportation sales tax is the allocation of that tax revenue, which by state statute can only be used for public safety or transportation. The allocation of that revenue is decided on by the county board. So the county board, over the years, you can see there's been some changes in how they've allocated it to the different funds. Currently, the transportation department gets 75% of that revenue. We've talked about in years past, although the board has not acted on it, reallocating some of that revenue from KDOT to the general fund to help close the budget deficit in the general fund. And then perhaps if KDOT needed to be made, quote unquote, made whole, you could do that by increasing the local motor fuel tax from 4.5 to 8 cents. And what's important to know, both the local motor fuel tax is indexed to inflation. So several years ago, DuPage County increased their motor fuel tax from 4.5 to 8 cents. It's actually at 9.1 cents right now because it's indexed to inflation and it will go up. But the authority within a county is the maximum is to increase it up to 8 cents for the motor fuel tax. So next slide. Some policies, again, to go over on the RTA transportation sales tax. I think I went over most of this, but currently 10% of the RTA transportation sales tax goes to the general fund. 9% goes to a special revenue fund that provides capital project type work to public safety departments. 6% goes to the Judicial Technology Fund, which helps fund capital project type work and technology for the judicial offices. And then 75% goes to the Transportation Department. And that percent allocation, that is a policy of the county board. The county board can change these percentages at any time. Next slide. The local option motor fuel tax. There's only certain collar counties that have this tax. Lake is currently at 4.5. Will is at 4.7. We're at 4.7 cents. McHenry's, they just increased it to 8, and DuPage is at 9.1. The authority to increase this tax is at the county board level. The county board can increase this tax. Next, and this tax has to be used by the Transportation Department. Next page. Special county retailers occupation tax. This has been talked about for years. This is the tax that the county board would have to vote to be put on a referendum, and then the voters would have to vote this tax in. The tax is imposed in 1/4% increments, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 1, et cetera. And an example here, it's 50 cents on $100 if you did 50%. Some surrounding county, sample county revenue, Winnebago, they've had this tax in place, I think since 2001, 2002. This is from, I think, 2 years ago. They're bringing in close to $40 million in tax revenue under this tax. Kendall County also has had this tax in place for probably 20 years. They're currently bringing in about 11.5 million. Peoria County has this tax, and Champaign County has this tax. And if you actually flip, Blair, if you can go a couple of pages down, this is the letter that we received. I asked the Illinois Department of Revenue what their estimate would be if Kane put even just a 0.25. And this was their letter that they sent us last year. And we're estimating that at 0.25, the King County could bring in $17 million in tax revenue. And then if you go to the next page, so here's a list of all of the counties across the state and whether they have this tax or they don't have this tax. And they're sorted by from highest to lowest. So you can see all the counties that have this tax. I would say probably around 45%, 45% of the counties across the state have this tax. Okay, now we can go back up a couple of slides. One more slide. Okay, now go ahead, one more slide. Okay, so when we're talking about trying to close the gap for the general fund, as we've talked about, there's only really 2 ways to close a budget gap. One is to raise revenue and the other is to cut expenses. And to cut expenses in the general fund, you're talking about 10% of the general fund. You're talking essentially 10% of every department. So in a department, for example, finance, purchasing, payroll, there's 12 of us, that would be 1 person. For a larger department, it could be 30, 40, 50 people to cut 10%. So that is one way to look at solving this budgetary deficit problem. And the other way is to look for revenue sources or to reallocate revenue sources that we already have. So and we're talking specifically here today about the 2025 budget in particular, but I do think we need to look forward for the years ahead because we can't just live year to year because we will be out of money if we continue to do this. So, yeah.
They're just.
Good morning. Kathy, trying to choose my words wisely here. We have spent so much time and money identifying shortfalls in revenue, the notion that this is how we can boost those revenues, the fact that we are spending out of reserves and we continue to change the names of those accounts and shuffle the deck and make new buckets and stuff like that. But we don't spend very much time other than to say, hey, if we just cut by 10% on the spending side, we can fall into compliance. How long would it take? What ideas do we have that if we put this out to our departments or offices, that this is the budgetary requirement? What does that look like? Is that something that they turn back in 30 days or is that 3 months? And at what point do we say we should begin looking at that in earnest?
Well, we in fact are already doing that as part of the 2025 budget process, because we've asked departments to limit the number of vacant positions that they have. So last year we had departments that were budgeting for 20 and 30 vacant positions.
I understand that, but from what the numbers, and maybe I'm wrong here, but from the numbers I recall, I mean, we're talking, you know, a 10 or 15, $18 million shortfall on things. And those numbers were $2 million, which means we still have
Right.
a ginormous chasm there.
And we still won't have any money for any capital projects either.
Okay, so in saying that we've looked at that, I think you've looked at that. If we were to ask those department or offices, how long do you think it would take you to put together something at this incremental amount, whatever, you know, whatever this committee or the board or exactly, you know, sees fit? At what point in time do we say we should begin looking at that so that it's fair and reasonable, so that we're not sitting here with a gun to our head at the end of the year saying, here we go. We promised we wouldn't do it again, yet here we are doing it again.
Well, the time to start is now. And I think with the budgeting of vacant positions, I mean, I'll give an example of myself as not as finance director, but just as a department head. We eliminated one position this year. We never replaced Erica Wagner's position. I decided not to fill it because I wanted to get an understanding of how the department works. We're still behind, but we're catching up. I have a brand new vacant position for a grant administrator. Should I even bother filling it? And I'm talking today. Today is March. Because if we're going to be talking about cutting, why would I hire somebody today that in 6 months I have to lay off?
Not sure if that's a rhetorical question or
Right.
a real question, because I think part of the wisdom of this committee or the executive committee might be that we do need to identify those employees. You know, and I oftentimes simplify things into offense and defense, and sometimes adding a staff member that saves you incrementally is a smart move. If you need to add a grant writer that's going to bringing in money on the offense, how could you not, you know, you need to make the case for doing that. But at the same time, looking across the enterprise saying, we're not going to make it based on the revenues we have. How do we address that? How can your departments, and I think that there's been conversations and if I'm verbalizing something I shouldn't be, you know, I think that there are thresholds where there are certain departments that are small, 3, 4, 5 people. There is no cut there. I mean, and only because I look at my committee, but if we went back a few slides and you went to the 10-year thing, we were at 366,000 10 years ago at Human Services, and projected for next year is 365,000. I mean, we have held the line on that. So where is the threshold to say for a larger department, we do need you to bring back the 10%, because a 5-person department, we just can't say, here, you get half a person or 3 days of a person, you know, so when do those conversations begin? And again, not that we're doing it, but just that we need to see what that might look like, So that we're not sitting here in November saying, holy tamale.
Well, that was the purpose of doing the budget this way, which is the departments were told to hold their budget to within 3% of 2024. We will not be doing what we did last year, which is departments were allowed to have their sort of their beginning budget and then their supplemental requests. And essentially the supplemental requests all got approved. So there are no
So-
supplemental requests. So that's part of it.
But that 3% includes a buy down, if you will, of the reserve
It does.
that's included in there.
It does.
Okay.
But that's the reason why we are moving the whole revenue side of the equation, whether it's additional revenue, fund balance utilization, to the forefront of the budget process, because the general fund is out of money. It's only going to be solved by new revenue or budget cuts.
Mr. Tepe,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, as you and I have discussed, I prepared a presentation that I'd like to give today, and I actually think that presentation will address a large number of the points that Mr. Surgis is making. So as soon as Ms. Hopkinson is finished, I'd like to put on that presentation.
sounds good.
Did you bring popcorn or anything?
Good shill.
Just to finish going through this slide, and I mean, if we did a 2025 budget for the general fund, that was just 3% higher, than the 2024 budget, we would need $11 million of fund balance reserves. Based on the CPI, if the property tax levy was increased by 3.4 and we put the entire increase into the general fund, that would be 1.9 million. If the county increased the local option motor fuel tax up to 8 cents, that would bring in an additional $7.1 million in revenue, which would have to go to KDOT, would have to go to the transportation. They're the only department that can use that revenue. Then the offset to that is the RTA transportation sales tax, which currently 75% of that goes to KDOT. You could reallocate 6.2 million of that, an additional 25%, and move that to the general fund, which would be a huge help to the general fund. And then the special county retailer occupations tax for public safety. I think if you were going to do it and looking at it long-term for all the capital needs of the county and assuming a growing expense budget, if the expenses weren't cut at 1%, conservatively, if you considered $15 million a year, would bring in $60 million a year. Currently, $75 million of our general fund is public safety. So a good portion of our general fund is public safety. So you could use, I know in speaking with Kendall County, they have just a separate public safety fund, and they put up most of their public safety costs in that fund, and then have this public special county retailers occupation tax as the revenue for their public safety. So those are some options which putting out to the finance committee to talk. And of course, cutting expenses is the other option. And if you were asking me how you would do that over time, it would, if you wanted to cut the county's budget back to where it is, where it was 3 years ago, because that's what you would kind of have to do. You would have to probably, if you didn't want to do that in a drastic way with massive layoffs, you would have to just keep reducing the amount that you would allow each department to have over the years to get back to the revenue.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathy, earlier I had asked and you had said-
Microphone, please.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Earlier, Kathy, I'd asked if you would give me the percentage increase for each and every one of the collective bargaining agreements. In looking at that, my guesstimate, that's all it is, with benefits is going to be at least 4%. If in fact it's 4% and our salary and benefits in the general fund account for approximately 75% of our expenses in the general fund, that 4% increase for the collective bargaining agreements alone at 75% would equate to 3%. So there'd be no additional money in 25 for any other increases, period. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Can you say it
Okay,
again?
my question is, if everyone on the collective bargaining agreements gets 4% or more, including benefits for 25, and that's 75% of the budget payroll and benefits, that would equate to 3% overall for the whole budget, the general fund budget.
Okay,
75% of 4% is 3%.
Well, I will say this, the county finance department and the county HR department are not involved at all in any of the collective bargaining agreements.
No, I'm not
right?
asking
Right.
you to solve the problem or HR.
Right.
What I'm saying is, what we have to do is face some realities. The reality is, if because of these collective bargaining agreements and other increases for the people that are not union employees, we don't have any extra money in 25 for anything else.
And
And
they're-
that may not be enough.
And they're not all 4%. For the collective bar, and I will get you that list, they're 3% and 4%.
Does that include benefits?
No, but the benefits don't go in the general fund. The benefits, so the fund of governmental accounting, so all of the payroll taxes for general fund employees is paid out of a separate fund. It's paid out of our FICA fund, and all of the pension is paid out of another separate special revenue fund, the IMRF fund. It makes accounting a lot of fun. Now,
We'll have to pay it.
we still have to pay it, but it's
Yeah.
not in our general fund, right? It's not in our general
Comes out of
fund.
left-hand pocket.
Yeah.
Paint a great picture.
Well, so the question is, I mean, how does what does the finance committee, other than the guidance that has already been provided for the 2025 budget, which is pretty much to reduce the number of vacant positions that's added and to hold the budget to 3% of the 2024 budget, is there additional guidance to then reduce expenses even further?
I think that's what we need to accomplish today. Okay? I would like to hear what Mr. Tepe has to say before we really discuss what approach we want to take or what approach we'd like to take. That's okay with everyone. So, Mr. Tepe?
This presentation was emailed out to all board members this morning, if people want to download it and look at it on their laptop.
How do we make this work? Slideshow? All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to kind of introduce this by saying I received a tremendous amount of help from Kathy Hopkinson with the numbers, so that way you'll believe them a lot more. Okay. And that I've tried to, and I want to present this, but I've tried to do this in more of a factual manner, not a manner in which I'm trying to say this is what we should do. So I want to present the issues in a slightly different way that hopefully will be more understandable. You know, as Kathy said, we need to either reduce costs or increase revenue. If not, I think we're headed for a fairly major financial crisis. We all understand that, you know, our job as a board is to manage a $270 million operation. These are our primary sources for income, and a lot of it comes from grants. But when you begin to look at it, our total budget is 271 million, but the general fund is 122.5 million of that. And I will say that the county has more control and more input associated with the general fund, because with the other funds, many of them are directed in certain ways or have to be spent in certain ways. And when you begin to look at some of the spreadsheets from Kathy, she really manages the county. She and her department really manage the county by fund more than budget. So we've all just, you know, completed a fairly major study of space needs and the kind of things that we need. These are the kind of facilities that we know we need to do something with. We also have an entire maintenance budget that's going to be completely used up in the next year. All of this stuff is needed, but how do we fund it? Particularly if we continue to use reserves to fund our general fund, we're not going to be able to easily get any financing from anyone. So that cannot happen if we continue to use reserves. So here in this sheet, you begin to look at, and if you look at the revenue and expenses row associated with this, okay, you can see where on average our difference between revenue and expenses is about $15 million. So we have to have a plan to make up and or exceed the changes that we have to do to that particular gap. So here are our major choices to increasing revenue. We've got the PTEL increases to property tax. We can increase our share of county motor fuel tax. We can reallocate RTA funds, or we can implement a sales tax. If we increase property tax, that has not been increased in 14 years. The current year's increase is maxed out at 3.4%. If we did that, that would give us about $2 million per year. And if we did that for 3 years, it would give us $6 million. So future increases are probably going to be tapped out at that $2 million level. So even increasing or even implementing the PTEL increase will not really cure that entire gap, but it's one of the things that we should consider as a start. Second is to increase the county motor fuel tax, as Kathy was pointing out. That would give us $7.15 million a year. And even though that goes to primarily to KDOT, it's still numbers that we can allocate that would help us to close that gap. And DuPage, McHenry, and Lake counties have already implemented either some or all of that particular increase. So it's not that we're going to be alone as a county doing this and bearing the brunt of it. DuPage County in particular, they're already over 9 cents, as Kathy mentioned earlier. Next is to reallocate the RTA tax. Currently, 75% goes to KDOT. I believe we're the only county that gives that much allocation to KDOT. So if we were to decrease that allocation to 50%, that would free up 6.3 million that could be allocated to the general fund. Okay. And our finance directors have been urging us to do that for several years. We could implement a 1% sales tax or some fraction thereof. If we did the 1% sales tax, that would increase our revenues by 60 million per year. It's the one that is the hardest one to do because that one's going to require that a referendum be passed. And other areas have done this, as Kathy was talking. When we begin to start looking at reducing costs, these are all of the elected officials, and I've included the chief judge, even though he's not directly elected by the people. He is elected by the judges, and he is responsible for a fairly substantial part of his budget. Yeah. So these are the departments that we need to talk about. We've got some that are partially funded and some that are funded independently of the general fund. So I've eliminated these departments that are really funded independently. They don't get any funding or they get very little funding from the general fund. That brings us back to these departments. And if you're going to start looking at ways to cut, okay, the key variable is people. So reducing staff would have to be very key to what happens. And I now have what's coming up are the personnel numbers that's first associated to those departments that are managed by the elected officials, and then those that are managed by the county. So if you look here first at the sheriff department, as you see, and by the way, I spoke with the sheriff and the state's attorney, and I left messages for the chief judge so that they were prepared for some of the kinds of things coming out of the presentation and understood that we're not necessarily allocating, but that we do this. But if we're going to do this, if we start, the key thing we're going to be looking at is a 10% reduction in these departments. And if we did it by reducing personnel, assuming that the average pay with benefits was around $60,000, okay, in total, we'd be looking at 226 people, but we'd be looking at almost 60 people out of the sheriff's department and another 32 people out of the state's attorney's office. Now, I've been on this board for a short while, but while we've been here in particular, you know, the state's attorney came to us and had us increase personnel that were directed at people trafficking and personnel that were directed to look into child pornography. Those are the kinds of things we should be doing. Those are not the kinds of things we should be cutting. I also want to note that I've been advised that any cuts to public safety will probably initiate a lawsuit. We look at the other major departments and the cuts and personnel, all of these would be substantial. So we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% of our workforce if we do all of the cuts by personnel. And we'll have to do something because we cannot operate in a deficit budget. So again, here are our major choices. The PTEL increase is 2 million or 6 million over the next 3 years if we were to do that. Increasing the gas tax would give us 7.15 million. Reallocating the RTA tax would give us 6.3 million. And implementing a 1% sales tax would be 60 million, 30 million if we did a 0.5% sales tax. And then the other choice is significant cuts to personnel. And what I'm after, Mr. Chairman, is we need a plan now.
Definitely.
It's inappropriate for us to talk about these issues and then go to our department managers and say, we want you to come forth with a budget for next year, when we can't give them the parameters on the limits of what it is or the direction of what we want to do in order to give them a primary definition of the funds that are available. Okay? So we can't continue to ignore this. We need to do this now.
The revenue generation ways that you mentioned, two of those we have control over. One we have to go out to referendum for. So keep that in mind as we discuss things, that we don't have control over the entire thing. Mr. Sturgis?
Two things that jumped out at me, Vern. I think you and I are very much on the same parallel with several items here. But to say that we can't give them the parameters, we continue to try and refine those each and every meeting. And I think that we're saying, as of right now, with no other action, we know exactly what those parameters are. And that's what I was asking for Kathy. When do we begin dialogue that says, what would that look like? So
Well,
I disagree with, we haven't given parameters. We've voiced those and we've voiced those loudly. For the rest of this, for the other side of the coin in terms of revenue generation, I think it's birthed from this committee. And I don't think we can wait much longer. I mean, if we're going to go to a referendum for a sales tax, which seems to be where the biggest, I don't want to say bang for your buck, but the largest bucket of money increase, why haven't we begun looking at that? Why aren't we what does a marketing firm look, what is the public saying? What are the feelers out there? And again, Mr. Chair, I have said all the way along, I don't know that you can ask for more without showing or demonstrating that we're willing to spend a little less. On the other hand, I do believe that at some point, we do need to be able to say, we're just flat out of money, and without cutting services, we need this increase, whether that's 0.5% or 1% or whatever the referendum might be. We might be to the point where you need to begin having that dialogue, but I don't think that's isolated. I do think we need to set deadlines by which we're going to be instituting this. And my second question is, Vern, when we lay out there, I've been told that we will be sued. I don't like those threats. I don't like that gun to my head. I don't like that intimidation. Be sued by whom, for what, who said that? Okay. I mean, if somebody's going to push, I'm going to push back and say, if you've got something to say, then say it. If there's an imminent lawsuit pending, tell me why, but don't try and govern me or tell me what my opinion should be by intimidation. I don't appreciate that. I don't want that part of our conversations. But if that is a reality because somebody or an elected office or a department has come forward or a collective bargaining agreement has said, then we should just lay that on the table and be aware of it. So it's just not out there as a veiled threat in the ether, but a genuine concern to be discussed.
well, that's good. Thank you. Just a minute. I think one of the things that we've pointed out, both of you in our discussion is that if we talk about a 10% cut, and we're talking about 271 employees.
13, how many are we losing?
Yeah.
225.
And we're going to provide services to the county with that fewer people. I don't know if we have to go to see the numbers and see, what every department's going to have to realize that we can't do this. We can't do that. No way can we talk about reducing our employees by that much. I don't see how we can even think about that. Everybody thinks that our expenses are tied up in other things, but our expenses are tied up with people.
70%.
You know, and so that's it. Okay. So,
Mr. Tepe gave a good presentation, but there's some things that have been left off the table. And I think we need to get everything on the table. And a couple of them I've been bringing up. One is, you know, our county is not currently 100% LED. I saw a presentation about a month ago, and we potentially have a grant to get 100% LED, and it's going to save us $980,000 a year. That's almost $1 million a year. Why didn't we do that 10 years ago? That's water in the bridge. We can't address that, but we need to jump on that. I mean, that is a huge saving. The other is, you know, I see by meeting with a lot of the directors, I find some of the real issues. And, you know, one of them I'm noticing, we're storing a lot of stuff. And so I have a new quote, build it and we'll fill it. You know, going out to the where the corner is, they have a whole section for storage and it's filled. And a lot of it's old furniture that nobody wants to throw away. Down in the 3rd Street courtyard, furniture magically shows up in the basement that someone wants to not throw away and they want to store it. We need to be, you know, and we need to look at everything. One of the things I noticed meeting, we're still using paper fax machines. That's an additional cost over internet faxing. And some of the response, well, I don't want to give up my machine. Well, it's costing the county money. And, you know, we need to start then maybe charging back those departments. You want to be less efficient, then you pay for that. There are other opportunities. You know, we rolled out extra laptops to all the state's attorney during COVID so they could work from home, but we didn't take away their desktops. Now there's a security issue in that, and that needs to be addressed first, but we're doing double support on that. And I think we need to start looking at efficiency. I mean, you know, we have rooms in this building that we're storing stuff. You know, there's a room right below Blair. We're storing furniture and paper. Well, one, it's a fire hazard, but, you know, and I feel bad for Blair if we catch on fire. Well, all of us really, and there's other buildings. I mean, some of the department heads, when I meet with them, they have to stagger when their people are in the office because they don't have enough office space here in this building. And there's whole rooms filled with paper and stuff. When I toured down at the public health, they have a whole room stored of files they haven't had a chance to scan yet, and they don't have the people to do it. That would free up in that room at least. And there's other departments that are in the same boat. So I think we need to look at everything because there's cost. Is that going to save us all? But it may cut what we have to raise revenue on if we get more efficient. And then one of the big ones is what I call the unfunded mandates, where the state's passing laws with no funding. At the judicial meeting last week, the state's attorney said $3 million in extra payroll because of the Safety Act. And she's trying to get funding from the state. To me, that's a hidden tax to the county and our people because we have to pay that and we're not getting the funding. And I think we need to start holding our state legislators liable when they pass laws that do not provide the resources to pay for it. So there's opportunities there that we can get more efficient, and we need to sometimes invest into the county to save money. The example is LED lights. And then, you know, we went the solar. We haven't heard any report backs. How much is that saving us? Is it really?
well, you know,
So I think we need to include that in the discussion too. is all
everything
I'm
you've
saying.
mentioned of those, there's another side. We save 900,000 on LED. What's going to cost us to change LED?
Grants.
Well, the grants, fine.
And it was less than 2.5-year payback on it.
But those are things we need to look at, whether it comes.
And
up
that's all
to-
I'm saying. We need to look at everything.
If it comes up to $20 million a year or whatever is different. Mr. Tepe,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to disagree with my friend in front of me here. We need to give direction to the people, and as Kathy said earlier, if we're going to try to cut or hold things down, and if we're going to continue to fund, you know, out of reserves, it's hard for Kathy to say, I want to hire another person because there's no sustainability there. that there's going to be money to pay that person. So that's why I say these are the kind of big things that we need to decide, now or within the next few months to give direction. And so let's argue about it. Well, then,
All right, Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Bill, before you go, has there been, how do you back figure dates on this and do we have those? So if you have the slide that's up there now and you said a PTEL increase or whatever, number 4, number 5, do we have a calendar that works it backwards and says you would have to do this by June or yes, something along that line?
What was that, Ken?
Like if you wanted to put a referendum on the ballot,
When do you have to?
do we have a deadline sort of or a,
But it's,
I know the answer is yes. Do we know what that deadline might be? Do we have those?
Madam Chair?
Soon.
Yesterday.
No.
Thank you very much. It's on. Thank you. Yes, we do. We have to get the referendum to the clerk by August. And I cannot do anything. And I've done as much back homework as I can quietly do to organize this, but I dare not move forward with any of it without getting permission of the board to do so. So it is up to the board and this committee to start defining what option or none you'd like to do, because I don't want to overstep. I need your authority to move forward.
With that, let's just say it's August 1st. In terms of practicality, to work through a committee structure, if it has to go from finance to exec to the county board, and let's say it kicks back once, August 1st, July, June, we're April next week. So can we set those goals to say that this needs to be on that agenda and make those public to say this is when those discussions are going to be, so that otherwise, saying things like soon doesn't work for me. I mean, we need to be able to say it needs to be on by here and approved by then or disapproved if or not, this and then that.
So to be able to get that date, what is it that you think you need to be able to make that decision? What kind of other discussion, other facts do we need to get to make you able to make the decision? Which would it go?
If you're asking me personally, I've been very vocal about saying, I believe that referendums are not a bad thing. That empowers the people to make choices. And when I look at Kane County as a whole, specifically, if I look at the Forest Preserve District, Forest Preserve went out and said, hey, we're going to do this. We would like to buy land. Is this what you want this county to look like? And overwhelmingly, the people said yes. They not only said it one time, they said it a second time. And now we've run out of operational money and we need to go back a third time and say, hey, by the way, but I believe that having a strategy, a firm, a marketing group that's going to come out and put this together to not just say, we need the money, but to say, this is why we need that money. And this is where the money is going. And this is the other components that we've done behind the scene. We've reallocated a little bit of this. We've done some cuts here. We've done everything we can. But the reality is, if we don't do this, that road might not get done. That project may not happen. That department, that sheriff's office might, which is incredibly high standings. Maybe we can't do everything we said we would. Not like as a threat, but just to be honest and say, if you run out of money, you've run out of money. So I would need to know, to answer you specifically, what that strategic plan looks like and who that firm might be that we would work with to make that happen. And my also understanding is that we might not be able to do that as a board.
Oh, no.
This might need to be an outside group, a not-for-profit that's engaged in this And if that's the case, what does that look like? But I'm not thinking that happens all by itself. So what truly the timeline on this, it's like we're almost behind the 8 ball.
Definitely.
But it's not till August. Oh, it's yesterday.
Mr. Sturgis, if I may. sir.
Madam Chair,
And Bill, I thank you because I cut you
Oh,
off and I
no problem.
apologize.
Excuse
other
me,
here,
but
but Madam
I'll be-
Chair,
I'll
go
be
ahead.
very quick. I've obviously have done a lot of thought consideration about this, only because the board has brought this up in previous conversations. So I've taken the time to do some investigation. And right now, it is not a not-for-profit. It would be a separate PAC. It would be the Friends of Kane County, hypothetically, could be the name. And that would have to be formed. I already have a group of individuals who are ready to step forward. Some of them, most of them are friends of the county. So they are ready to move forward. But again, it can't be done until I get your authority to do this. So that's already been taken care of. Estimates have been put in place. Members have been contacted, potential members, in informal conversations, obviously, all informal without getting permission from the board, and they all know this. So, like I said, it's just pending on the decisions that are made through this committee, and then up to the full board. And if you give me the authority to move forward, the phone calls, directions energy will be put to that immediately.
Ms. Lewis, you had a,
Yeah. So I have 2 questions. Number one, I think that we have to, before today, say, yes, we want to move forward with that to actually get some teeth going in it. That's not to say that we are making that final decision to put the referendum out there, but I think we have to give Madam Chair the authority to at least look into this so that we can make that final decision. And then secondly, on a whole nother note, Mr. Tepe, when you put up that personnel number of, I think it was 1345, is that, okay, is that current people on the payroll right now, or is that positions? Because, we are taking back some of those positions.
That's current people on the payroll from.
That's
the-
actual payroll people. Okay, thank you. That was just my question.
Madam Chair.
Just, and again, one more clarity with it. It's when I say that there is a group of individuals who are willing to support, that support is also going to be financial support, the PAC. So it's not, if you give me that authority to move forward, we're becoming the Friends of Kane County. And with that friendship comes of not only time, but also some treasure. So it's a large commitment and one that I take very seriously for them, and that this board should also respect and take very seriously. So it's not just looking into, it's investing for the benefit of Kane County.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yeah, Shepro, the last day for a local government unit to adopt a resolution requesting a binding referendum for the November election is August 19th.
Very good. Very good. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Cliff's point, I was kind of expecting today that we were going to hear some kind of a timeline. I'm just a member of this committee, so I don't feel it's my place to create that for everyone else, but I was hoping that's what we're going to have. So maybe that's what we need to determine first as a group. What is our timeline? When do we want to have what deliverables in by? Going through all of these options as we have before, it can seem kind of circuitous, but really it's pretty simple. Let's talk about cuts first. We see where the cuts would really have to come from to be substantial, and that's primarily the sheriff's office, then the court services, state's attorney's office. I mean, these are areas that I think the public doesn't want us to cut. And, we can talk about small reductions. We have done that in the past. We did it across the board. Was it like 3.4% budget cut, I don't know, 6 years ago or so? But it was painful. There was a lot of grumbling from that. It wasn't an easy thing to do. So we could make some effort in that direction, I assume. But to go to 10% across the board for every department, we will get pushback. And when people talk about lawsuit, I don't think it's a threat so much as the fact that, these departments, these offices are mandated by the state to provide certain levels of service. And it's not clearly defined in the statutes what exactly those levels of service are supposed to be. So if we make a significant budget reduction in any of those offices' budgets, all they have to do is present a case that shows why what they're asking for is a reasonable amount to address the need. And I would guess that the judicial branch could make that argument. So if it were to go to a lawsuit, we would lose. It has happened before in the past. There was a office that did sue the county for its budget and it won. So it's not so much a threat, it's just understanding the mechanisms involved in us being the body that establishes the budget, but knowing that there are mandated services out there that are really hard to define, and we don't have so much control over all of these things. But to make the essential cuts to really close our budget gap, it's going to be coming from the judicial branch primarily. So that is a political fight. I don't think that we really want, but if we're going to talk small cuts, then that's what we're going to talk. And things like what Mr. Roth brought up, there's no reason we shouldn't be exploring these kinds of cuts in parallel with whatever we're trying to do on the revenue side. There's no reason we shouldn't be doing that. But to say we have to do that first and then go to the revenue side, I think is putting us into some risk, because we do have a timeline issue. We have to figure this out quickly, relatively quickly. So that means revenues. Now we have the two big mechanisms of the RTA motor fuel tax switch, something that we could do that will give us about half of what we're looking for in our budget gap. So we still have to come up with another 50% year over year. And then you have, your annual increases as well that you have to consider. So if we're just to go for that option, we still have to use reserves, and that's going to draw down, a little slower than what's predicted now, but it's still going to draw down. And we're going to be in the same problem years later, kicking the can further down the road. The sales tax referendum, I don't think we have time to hire somebody to do research to tell us if we should go after it or not. I think we all know that it's a viable option, and that at 0.25%, not a full percent, but just 0.25%, that closes the budget gap right there. And then what happens if we have future needs as costs increase? Well, that's when we can just, start discussing the RTA motor fuel tax option, because that's something that we can toggle. We can raise it, we can lower it. If we need to do a motor fuel tax increase for a couple of years and then bring it back, we can do that. We're not stuck. So that's kind of like a useful mechanism to sort of modulate in small increments. But the sales tax, that's something that is very obvious. And now if we're talking where cuts are going to come from, and primarily it's going to be the sheriff's office. I mean, you have people out there saying defund the police, and that's essentially what's happening there. If we're going to cut the sheriff's budget by 10%, that's not a good look for anybody. This sales tax, that gives people the opportunity to fund the police, to make sure that we're taking care of our law enforcement, because that is one thing I think everybody agrees on is absolutely essential. It's very critical. And we don't want to see that being put at risk in any way. So I think if we're going to talk about options, we need to say maybe by next month, we have that conversation on what this committee believes we're going to do, which direction we need to go in and why. Create that business case for if we're going to go for a sales tax, that's why we're going to do it. Send it to the county board. Let's make our statement. Let's set our parameters and let's go after our goals, because if we're going to keep waiting month after month, wondering what are we doing this month about this issue that's been looming for years, it's really just going to end up being unsuccessful. And I think we all want to see this problem of the budget gap solved. So those are my comments, and hopefully it helps.
Well, one of the things, it has to start here. So obviously, we need to make a recommendation as soon as possible, today possibly, that goes to the exec and goes to the board so that we're moving ahead. The more we put it off, the longer we put it off. It's not going to work.
Haven't we heard consensus on the referendum?
I-
Is there not consensus on the I mean, I haven't heard consensus on the other items, but on the referendum item.
But the other items we could do at any time,
Correct.
and we can change that every year, because it's every year, it's an annual thing. But the referendum is something that we have to plan for, and it's, it's going to be basically
To
permanent.
set an referendum, to set an affirmative toward a referendum, do we have to put a dollar figure in a percentage figure
Yes.
We had to
in there
Yes.
right now?
Yes,
Or
we
can
do.
we say we're going to get back with you whether it's a half
Yes,
percent
yeah,
or
we can do
3/4%?
Our resolution has to have it.
Yeah, we can go after, do everything we need, not necessarily putting a number there.
The
Can it be
only-
an amount not to exceed 1%? I mean, can we go something
Oh.
along those lines to
referendum
get this?
question Has to specify quarter, half, three
At-
quarter.
When
but
we,
you
when we
don't
go
have
out,
to do
when
that
we,
till-
yeah. When we word it for the referendum, then we have to decide.
I'm
we
confused.
can
If you're
start
saying
the-
we don't have to do it to the 19th, but we have to do it now to get it moving.
We need to start moving. We don't have to decide whether it's 1/4% or 1% or whatever. Let's get moving.
Can we just, if you're going to do that, and that would be appreciated, could we do an exploratory? And let it be exploratory,
I don't know.
because
Yeah.
that's all we need at this
Yeah.
point.
The other thing is we have to, not today, but eventually decide what that money is going to go towards. Because as I recall, it's either towards public safety,
Public safety,
transportation, or something else. There's
public
three.
safety.
Yeah, public safety is the only.
I think
viable.
that's pretty well, that's
Yeah,
been talked
but there's
about and
three.
decided years, in the last few years for that matter.
Yeah, the 5 categories are public safety, transportation, facilities, substance abuse, and mental health.
But Julie,
So I think if I'm hearing correctly, that we can decide in this committee whether we want to pursue a sales tax referendum. We do not have to decide what the actual amount is because we're just doing exploratory. And we don't have to determine who we want to send it to today. Am I correct in that?
that's right.
We don't have to determine where it's going to go or the amount. We just have to determine whether we want to explore it today, correct?
Right.
Okay, then my second question is, when we come to the time where we have to decide it, I obviously think it's a good idea to go to referendum. I think anytime you can get buy-in, it's a good thing. I do, however, want to know who's on the Friends of King County and who's going to be working on our behalf, because as elected officials, we clearly cannot influence the referendum. But I am curious about who will be on that committee that will be presenting this for us.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sanchez,
I think the point that we don't have to set the percentage today is valid because ultimately it's a county board decision. So we do want to at least forward something to the county board. My thought is that we essentially give consensus today to have something put before executive committee, which is obviously next week. But we don't have to pass it next week. We can just start having that conversation with a larger representation of the full body. You know, I think the executive committee is a good place for us to really start fleshing out this concept. Obviously, it's good to start it here, but basically, you know, if we could just get something to executive, and if it needs to get postponed until next month for a final discussion, I mean, that's fine. Otherwise, we're going to have this whole conversation at county board in 2 weeks. And I don't know if everybody's comfortable with that, then let's do that. But I think it'd be good maybe to have a little more of a business case that we can present of why we want to go for which option, you know, 2.5%, 0.5%, that kind of thing.
I think at this point, we really can't vote on making a recommendation to the
Not on
to
the
carry it
agenda.
forward because it's not on the agenda. But we certainly can, we can come up with a
Consensus.
Consensus. yeah.
consensus that we can go ahead. No,
You could encourage staff to do further research,
okay.
but you're not really
okay.
taking any action.
I guess that's what I was saying is this board comfortable with a resolution being presented at executive that didn't originate here? Can we get that kind of consensus today?
I think we have that consensus.
Well, you got committees.
Yeah.
Just a.
We have that
general-
consensus. I don't see anybody raising their hand, waving it, saying no. So I think we have that
I'd like to
consensus.
ask the state's attorney about that.
So you cannot take anything that is either a final action or could be perceived as a final action. So saying, do we have a consensus is essentially trying to get a vote without a vote. I think people can read the tea leaves of where people are and people can direct staff as see fit. But don't try to say, do we have consensus? And then no one's objects. And then, because that's seen and perceived as a final, because what you're
You're
doing
such
is
an attorney, you know?
you're
it's
moving
important.
you're moving it along is what I'm
Okay.
saying.
So we don't have consensus,
have-
but nobody's disagreeing, that's for sure.
Mr. Chairman.
Step bro.
Yes, Shepro, I would also caution everybody that the election code is very specific about the use of public facilities, resources, et cetera, to advocate for or against any public question. And I would be troubled by the idea that the board is somehow going to empower somebody to go out and find people to advocate.
Yeah, that's.
You know, they really do, you can do informational work, but I had experience with a fire district referendum where that was also an issue. So you just have to be very careful, or there will be lawsuits.
Could you guys give us the cliff notes, if you will? On, I know, it was a bad one, sorry. On the do's and don'ts and how to proceed, and can that come from the attorneys? That would be spectacular.
Yeah, and it's pretty straightforward.
Oh,
Madam Chair.
thank you. So I feel like I still don't, this committee has not given forward direction. I appreciate what has been just said and support what was just said from a legal perspective. I have two questions. One, I assume that we could have some kind of resolution presented at exec under new business. Is that correct?
You can put one up,
Yes.
yes.
I'm
You
just
can bring forward a resolution. It just cannot be voted upon at this meeting.
correct. Lovely. Okay, that's helpful. And then the second one, I believe it would be very helpful to get some direction from this committee of what of the possibilities to fund you are leaning towards, so that there's a narrowing of this. Because if we're going to hypothetically go to whatever amount it would be, and we say we'd like to give hypothetically $30 million to support mental health, there may be many people who'd say, yes, this county badly needs that, and that's an area that we would like to move forward towards. But that is a completely different kind of funding source that is very restrictive. If we were try to help our judicial public safety partners, which is the largest component of our general operations, that would be helpful as well. So that's just my thoughts.
All right, our state attorney's office.
So apologies, I misunderstood the question. The answer to your question of, can it be brought up sua sponte at exec? Yes, absolutely. It can be voted on and everything. It just needs to be noticed per usual VOMA. In fact, you also can even just take it straight to county board if there's a time crunch that needs to be addressed. That's within the chairwoman's purview. So the answer to your question is yes. I thought you were asking about today. For new business today, the best you could do is just push it to the next month. You could vote on that, but say the resolution will be brought up next month.
All right, Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, I think maybe to simplify just the conversation here today, I think there's a keen interest in going after the sales tax, and the only category of sales tax collection that makes sense is for public safety. So I don't even think, do we want to go after mental health or transportation? I don't even think those are really options at this point. So really, it just based on what I've heard in our discussions, funding public safety through that tax is the only option. So it's a matter of, do we want to do 0.25%? Do we want to do 0.5%? That's the kind of conversation I've been hearing. So I think if you're going to put something together for executive, maybe that could inform the shape of that resolution.
Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Yeah,
Shepro.
I think the answer, as Mr. Frank said, is,
Phone, please.
you can read the tea leaves from the discussion.
Yes,
That's what I just did.
yes. Was there somebody else? All right. Yeah, we move on.
Yeah.
So what's our conclusion?
Don't think we have. one.
Okay.
We read the tea leaves.
There's much.
Oh, Cliff notes. Cliff notes. All right, gosh. We've gone through the, Kathy, you still have something to say, or?
You're done.
You're done? Thank you very much. Boy, what a lively discussion. I think it's the best we've ever had in All right, new business, contracts and purchases. A couple of these I want to combine if we can, C and D. And we get to the others, go A through N. We're talking about the procurement cards and whatever, but other than having to vote on each one. But so I will start with resolution A, authorizing an amendment to the agreement with Healy Bender Patton and Bean and R.C. Wegman for the construction of an accessible ramp at the Kane County Sheriff's Office, RFQ number 42-020 for $31,795.
Leonard moves.
Leonard, Juby, discussion? Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Louis, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Sturgis, Pepe,
Tepe, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes. Item B, a resolution authorizing service agreement with the Facility Survey LLC, FSI, for the Building Management Department's work order software of $18,422.
Leonard moves.
Juby seconds.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Louis, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Sturgis, Pepe,
Tepe, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes. I'd like to take C and D together. I'll read both and we'll vote once, if that's all right. Resolution C is authorizing the contract with Langdon Group for the Mill Creek SSA Landscape Maintenance Service Program, tree-related services, bid number 24-025-TK for $160,000. And resolution D, authorizing the contract for Everlast Blacktop Incorporated for the North Sidewalk Improvement Project for the Mill Creek SSA, bid number 24-024-KK for $900,000. Motion for the two.
Moves both.
We have,
Sanchez seconds.
all right, motion second, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Louis, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Sturgis, Pepe,
Tepe, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Berman.
Thank you, Berman, yes. E is resolution authorizing a contract extension with NetSeed and Heartland Business Systems for Cisco hardware, software services and SmartNet RFP number 34-020, $800,000.
Moved by Louis.
Lewis moves,
Sanchez seconds.
Sanchez second, discussion. Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Louis, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Sturgis, Pepe,
Tepe, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes. F is a resolution authorizing updated capital projects from the capital fund, $11,604,572.
Sanchez moves.
Sanchez move.
Juby seconds.
To be second, discussion.
Mr. Roth's. I have 16 judicial campus lighting projects for 2.5. Is that
Microphone.
LED lights? Is that what you're? What part? Thank you. I'm good. Thank you.
Very good.
Okay.
And here, roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Louis, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Sturgis, Pepe,
Tepe, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Berman, yes. G is a resolution authorizing expenditure of funds for commercial floor coverings and related services with Mohawk Industries through Omnia Partners, contract number 202-000-2149 for $200,000.
Sanchez moves.
Leonard seconds.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Sturgis, Pepe,
Tepe, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes. Thank you. H is a resolution authorizing expenditure for funds with Zoom Video Communications Incorporated for Zoom Web Conferencing Services for the Kane County Information Technology Department, $43,275.
Sanchez moves.
Louis seconds.
Motion second, discussion. Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Louis, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Sturgis, Pepe,
Tepe, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes. I is a resolution authorizing the Health Department purchase of mosquito larvicide of $44,035.
Sanchez seconds. Get in there,
Discussion?
man.
Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Surges, Pepe,
Steffi, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes. J is a resolution authorizing the purchase of 3 vehicles for the state's attorney's office, $109,698.09.
Steffi
San-
moves.
Pepe moves.
Sanchez seconds.
Sanchez second. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Juby,
Juby, I.
Lewis,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Surges, Pepe,
Steffi, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Berman, yes. K is a resolution authorizing purchase of an armored vehicle for the sheriff's office, $465,929.
Leonard seconds.
Leonard second. Discussion. Mr. Surges.
Is this ARPA fund capable at all?
Microphone? Microphone?
Is that better? Mr. Sanchez, is this ARPA fund capable or is that coming from general fund?
Don't know that this is ARPA fund capable. We don't have a project request for this one. We did fund one for OEM recently.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, if I would be willing to vote on this, but I would love to put a stipulation on there that if it was ARPA-able, that it be redirected from there.
I would have to talk to the sheriff's office. I don't know if the deputy here knows what timeline they have with that. I couldn't speak to the kind of uncertainty we have with ARPA right now as far as what we're gonna do with our funding. You know, I mean,
So
we could look into it, but
if I could ask the state's attorneys, how do you modify or introduce something onto this that might suggest that if that can be reimbursed or redirected, we would like to do so?
You could amend the resolution, move to amend the resolution, or you could pass it on and ask your question before exec and address it at that point.
I would like to take action. I'm just not sure which one is appropriate. If anybody can help with that.
A couple of comments. So currently, this resolution is saying that they're going to use essentially RTA sales tax dollars because Fund 128 is funded by RTA sales tax revenues. I do know that this is a specialty vehicle.
Right.
That has to be custom built and it'll probably take like a year. And it's replacing a similar vehicle that has to be returned, as I understand it, to a federal site, because what we have currently is like a federal, a US vehicle, federal vehicle. As it relates to ARPA, there is a long list of ARPA items, and an application would have to be filled out, which isn't that hard to do. I mean, that can be done.
So I would like to add an amendment to this that states, Mr. Shepro, help me.
I think the amendment would be, if I understand your desire, would be to investigate the possibility of funding this through ARPA instead of RTA.
That was
I
my
like that.
amendment.
Okay. We have an amendment. We have a second to the amendment.
I'll second it.
Leonard seconds. Any discussion on the amendment? Sanchez.
Sir, do you know if this is a purchase that is kind of timeline crunched right now? Can we wait a few months on it? Because it would take a few months for us to even find out if we could ARPA.
Keep moving it along
But
while
we're
we're
not
doing it.
paying-
Yeah.
Oh, so you're saying for later reimbursement?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, we
as-
could look at it, but
As I understand it.
Don't hold it up. Keep it. moving.
Because it's a custom vehicle, you have to order it now and they
Yeah.
may not be getting it for 9 to 12 months from now.
and that's another thing as well is the timeline on the back end of it, because if we don't even get it by the end of 26, then
I'm just throwing the placeholder in there is what I'm trying
yeah,
to do.
ARP is just a little
Yeah.
uncertain right now, so it's just.
It's just an option.
We can look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Better off to just.
Any
bring
other
it
discussion?
back again. You get-
Roll call on the amendment, please.
Juby,
Should be I.
Lewis,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Tepe,
Point of order. My understanding is this amendment will not hold up ordering this equipment?
Correct.
Yes.
Leonard.
They'll get rides in it
Yes.
though, right?
Berman.
Berman, yes.
in
Yes,
2
yes.
years.
All right, now. we've
Mr.
got-
Chairman, with respect to the next series of resolutions, I believe,
We're gonna vote on
Get
this.
the vote on the,
I thought you just, sorry.
Was the amendment.
Vote on the amendment, now we're voting on the
Yes.
motion. Roll call, please.
Juby,
Should be I.
Lewis. Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Tepe,
yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes.
Now, Mr. Chairman, on the next series of resolutions, I believe items E, F, I, K, and M could be made as a single motion and passed by voice vote because you're merely acknowledging receipt of a report. Those are the acknowledgement that an annual review has taken
Review.
place.
I, okay,
E, F,
F,
I,
I.
K, and M.
okay, and M also? Okay. Could be a voice vote,
I think you could combine that in one motion and do it by voice vote.
not having to read each one of them.
A yes.
Do we have a motion that would,
Mr. Frank thinks we should read them.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
An E, F,
K
K, M.
and M.
okay. A resolution authorizing annual review of numbers of procurement cards issued for the Kane County Clerk's Office and each of their transaction limits. And for the Kane County Law Library and South Help Legal Center and each of their transaction limits, that's F.
Yep.
And I is for the public defender and each of their transaction limits is I, and K is Kane County Veterans Assistance Commission and each of their transactions, and M is the auditor's office in each of their transactions. You want a
Leonard
motion?
moves.
Leonard moves,
Sanchez seconds.
and says second, you said a voice vote?
Yeah.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, now we'll go through A, B, C. Oh, we have to go each one of them. I'm sorry.
Each one.
Yeah, the other ones. We do.
It's not our money. Nope. These are
I think you
cards.
could combine the others as well.
Voice
There's a
vote?
difference between authorizing and acknowledging why you do it
Voice
two
vote?
steps. I think yes, because you're not expending any money. You're merely
Proving it.
authorizing the,
Issuance.
so yes, I think you can do voice vote,
All right.
Except for O.
except for the, yeah, the last
The
one,
last
the
one is no,
ordinance.
that's not it.
That's separate.
So
That's
it's A,
separate.
B, C, D,
All right.
J.
A is a authorizing a number of procurement cards issued to Kane County Public Health Department and each of their transaction limits. B is a resolution for the Community Development and Community Services Department for each of their transactions. C is for the Office of Emergency Management and each of their transaction limits. D is for the Environmental and Water Resource Department for each of their transactions. G is for the Building Management Department and each of their transaction limits. H is for the Human Resource Management, and each of their transactions. J is for
Yeah, J.
Animal Control and each of their transactions. L is for the Information Technology Department, each of their transactions. And N is for the Finance Department, each of their transactions. I'd like a motion to approve those.
Leonard moves.
Sanchez
Move.
seconds.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? So be it. Now moving on to item O, which is an ordinance creating the Illinois residency requirement for county employees.
Surges moves.
Surges moves,
Sanchez seconds.
just second discussion.
Mr. Chairman, Surges,
Surges,
through the Human Resources Committee, we've advanced this to finance. Part of this is a housekeeping issue. We do not have all of the ducks in a row, if you will, and I'm told that it is extremely difficult to get those ducks in a row in terms of the compliance and complexities of having employees in other operating states. We've had a couple of requests coming through for, California and I mean, points outside of Illinois. The debate at our committee was along the lines of, are you telling me that of all the employees or all of the individual candidates in the state of Illinois, we can't find anybody to fill these positions? And so that really begs to say, wow, that's unusual. We seem to be one of the only counties that do not have a rule like that. We are not saying this to threaten anybody, so we made sure there was a grandfather clause in there that gave a sunset provision of at least 36 months to relocate to Illinois. Part of that was done based on conversations with the chief judge, where they had an attorney that whose spouse was relocated, but that attorney still has a caseload, and to try and replace that person with the caseload was, not going to happen. It was just more expeditious to keep that employee on. And we felt that 36 months, they felt that that was more than enough time to work through that caseload. So we're trying to advance this forward. We have looked at several options, including obtaining the workers' compensation and other benefits through an outside source such as ADP. We have met with negative on that. We can't find a vendor willing to do that. So at this time, to complete the housekeeping, I think we need to advance this. And I did ask Human Resources and Finance, Kathy Hopkinson, to be here. Jamie is here to answer any questions the committee might have as to why this is needed.
Okay. I think the secret to this is that there are other ways for someone to provide a service for the county without being an employee.
We have researched that, such as temporary, such as contract, such as independent contractor.
Yeah.
And I'm told that this is a step that's needed to get where we're going. So.
Everybody understand? Any discussion in what I said? Well, we have roll call then.
Thank you, sir.
Juby,
Juby,
Lewis.
Yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Pepe,
Deputy, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Berman.
Burn, yes. That's the end of our new business. I have no old business. Is there any old business to be? Motion to have our reports placed on file.
Ask for unanimous consent to place reports on file.
Any negative? Reports will be placed on file by consent. My only comment is, we've had some great discussion today. That's the kind of thing we need to have at every meeting. So appreciate it. And everyone contributed. No executive session necessary. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Sanchez moves.
Sanchez moves.
Juby second.
Hello, Juby second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 11 o'clock.